What's going on, everybody? Welcome to The Abnormal Truth. Haven't done a video in a while. I am interviewing Chris Fringe from the Venomous Fringe channel. How you doing, Chris?
Hello there, Abnormal. How are you doing today?
Doing pretty good. Have the day off, and I'm just glad to be talking to you.
Absolutely. I'm on vacation all week, so I totally understand. Very glad to be speaking to you as well. Thank you again for having me on.
No problem. It's always nice to be on vacation, right?
Absolutely. It sucks that it's only 7 days.
Hey, that sounds like a long time to me.
It goes by fast for me, unfortunately, with my schedule, but for I wish it was longer than what it looks.
Yeah, it'll fly by, of course. So what do you have going on? What have you been doing lately on your channel?
Well, for the listeners of your channel, hello everybody. For what I do, I'm the show host of the Venomous Fringe. The show focuses on topics of cryptid and paranormal related incidents, as well as interviewing various researchers and eyewitnesses. My main focus on the show is talking Dogman, and what I do on the show mostly is when I discuss Dogmen is we do your typical interview with eyewitnesses. We sit down and talk with researchers, and recently we've been really talking with people whom have had encounters and also people who are in different states. We've been doing these state episodes. So we've been collecting data from each state, and we had these eyewitnesses and commenters respond and reach out to us through email or YouTube and tell us about what they've seen or what they've heard. So that's basically what's been pretty new lately is we're just focusing on these state shows to provide data and showcase it in an updated form so people get a better hotspot on where each dogman a sighting is and how connected they are from one another in each state.
I think that's a good idea. You know why? Because I don't believe you've done Texas yet, have you?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, see, I'll be interested in a Texas show. I know I've heard a few cases in Texas. What do you think? Which state do you think has the most, or maybe a few states that seem to be hot spots in the states?
I will give you my top three. And it's interesting how you mentioned Texas because I am going to be doing a Texas episode after I do Kentucky, which is coming up this week. Actually, spoiler for everybody out there who does know who follows the state episodes. Um, but I'm going to go with Texas, Kentucky, and Ohio. And no, Ohio, Michigan. Um, so Texas, Kentucky, and Michigan. And the reason why I say those three preferably is because Texas, as you know, is a very large state. There's a lot of land and there's a lot of story. I'm sure you are familiar with the Converse Valley werewolf. The Texas that's the story of the farmer's son who was found brutally mutilated by this creature. Um, I may have just butchered where that is from, but have you heard of that by any chance? Abnormal, the Converse Valley werewolf.
No, no, actually, I'm not. And would you be putting Texas as the number one hotspot, or is that
I
in
would
order?
say the number one hotspot, not just for the encounters, but also because there's a lot of black box activity which relates to the encounters as well of the dogmen hotspots within the state itself. And plus, also, Texas is such a huge state. And when I look at the current map for dogman encounters and I see the state of Texas, it's filled with dots, red markers of where these things are being cited. And for me, I've collected a few reports from Texas as well, and to put that on there as well as some other reports I've collected off the internet, it really sparks that Texas is indeed the most hottest region for dogman phenomenon, and Kentucky a close second, but Michigan as well because Michigan has a lot of body mass and up in the northern Michigan peninsula. So I think between those three states, those are the top three with a lot of activity.
Well, that's interesting and also scary because I live in East Texas, and so yeah, that's interesting. I did not actually know that.
Well, I will say this: when we, not to pull off the gears, but when there's the theory of data and where there's the most activity, I look at it from the sense of how much is on the map and how relevant it is. Now, for example, I had recently done a state in Florida. I did the Florida state, and in that state, there was only about 6 encounters that were connected close to one another, but not necessarily full of activity. So the activity was divided in between counties. So in the state of Texas, you got reports that are 15, 30 minutes apart from one another in
They're
region wise.
concentrated then.
Correct.
Were the
Concentrated.
uh, were the dogmen of the same type and description?
Um, when I'm looking at the map and when I'm looking at a lot of the reports, because the thing about this is that and all credit goes to the Cloaked Hedgehog's map. This is kind of how I'm receiving all the data. But there's also articles and URLs that I can look in that have all this information of what each type is what. And when I look at some of these stories, they don't necessarily specify that, but what they do specify is that when they describe them, the creature, it sounds to me like it's a canine variant 3. Now, for the listeners out there, and if you would wish, what the 7 types are, what the types of dogmen so far that are being showcased through our research, you have 3 type 3s. Now, type 3s are in between a dogman and a Sasquatch, not necessarily a Gudgewii. That is the most common in that case of being a mixture of a dogman and Sasquatch like hybrid, but it's more along the lines of a Sasquatch having more distinct dogman like features, such as the type 3 variant 3 resembles a typical Sasquatch with a snout, and then you have the canine variants, which are more of your what lives up to the name of dogman. So, not to switch gears or anything, but the canine variants, of course, being the more common cited, in my opinion. And what you're seeing in Texas in the concentrated massive encounters, I believe to be that of a canine variant 3, because a lot of the reports are coming back with tall, muscular build, close to 9 feet tall, 10 feet tall, and weighing over what weighs to be at least 500 to maybe 600 pounds, maybe less than that. And very muscular, has the werewolf-like face, the pointy ears, the snout, the claws, and the paws and whatnot. So you have a canine variant that has a lot of mass that what looks to be a werewolf, but is I believe is a canine variant 3, and on many more of them through these concentrated encounters throughout Texas.
So, have you found that the regular dogman, what is the most reported type? Your regular, just what's the most common type that is reported?
I feel it's a mixture of the canine variant 1, which is a timber wolf looking creature, except it's just much more taller. So you have your average timber wolf, and then just imagine it just bipedal and a little taller than what an average looks. And then you have the canine variant 3, which is a what I had just described. Think of the werewolf from Van Helsing, or think of the dog soldiers.
Right.
You
Yeah.
have those 2 examples, and the canine variant 3, the pointy ears, the snout, looks more like a bit of a werewolf, but also looks a little bit more of your average canine at the same time. Because a lot of the reports you get with dogman encounters are saying it looks like a German Shepherd's head. And in that case, that's what a lot of these canine variants resemble. So I think between the canine variant 1 and the variant 3 are the 2 most common reported dogmen cited.
Yeah, I keep hearing the German Shepherd a lot, but it's almost always the ears or more pointed. And but yeah, that's fascinating.
One
What state are you in, by the way?
I currently reside in Pennsylvania. I'm in PA. And it's interesting because Pennsylvania over here we have the Loop Guru, the Loop Guru Circle, and or the Lycan Loop as they call it. And
Explain that for the viewers that have never heard about the Loop Guru.
well, the Loop Guru is the well. There's two things to it. But the Loop Guru is the infamous legendary tale of like one of the legend of the werewolf, so to speak. Now, before I'm not going to switch gears, but basically, in a sense, the werewolf and Dogman are essentially to be either two different creatures or the same creature, just with the same attributes and whatnot, and which I've openly keen to that theory as well. But what I'm getting at is a loop guru basically in the folklore of that of a werewolf, and then you have the Lycan loop, which is basically this loop or the circular mass in southern Pennsylvania that has a lot of reported activity. If you're familiar with Butch Witkowski's work, he's done a lot with the Lycan loop. And yeah, if anybody out there is interested too, feel free to take a look at what Butch Witkowski, my apologies, of what he has done with that Lycan loop, because it's a very interesting piece of information, which really amends to not just Dogman, but also Sasquatch theory as well. But yeah, hopefully that was a little bit explained vividly for everybody out there. I mean, personally, the Loop Guru and all that, I've never really dug too much into necessarily, because of the sake being, I try to get more of the flesh and blood Dogman perspective out there, because I feel Loop Guru is more supernatural than it is of a natural, if you know what I mean.
Definitely. And did I catch this wrong? Did you mention Bigfoot and being a lycanthrope? Possibly. That's something I've never
I
heard
know it
of.
may. My apologies to that. I know that it may have sounded like that, but I meant in the sense that of the Lycan loop that there is also possible Sasquatch related activity within that region as well, not
Ah, I
just.
understand. I understand because that blew my mind for a second. I was like, "Well, I've never heard that."
I'll be honest with you, if that was the case, then that would be a very scientific breakthrough for the cryptid field, because that would open
Yeah.
up a new gateway.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's actually something that's never even crossed my mind.
But
Go ahead. Go ahead.
oh, I was going to say this too to conclude on the Lycan loop, though. Um, for anybody out there who is curious of the Lycan loop and the location of where it's at, if you're familiar with Altoona, Pennsylvania, that county region is the provenance of where the Lycan loop is reported to be. So you have Clearfield, Pennsylvania, off of I-State 80, and then you have all the way through Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. So you have at least a good 15-mile gap of mass off this interstate and roads of the Lycan Loop. I just wanted to throw that out there for any listeners who are curious of the Lycan Loop, the location, actual location in Pennsylvania of where it is. So it's about around southern central Pennsylvania, that region.
Okay, and we will switch gears here in a second, but what is the lore behind that? Native American skinwalker type lore, or what's the background on the origins of that, if that makes sense?
The Lycan Loop, from what I've always believed it to be, was a series of events that occurred back in the 1800s through the 1900s, in which um, there is a series of werewolf looking creatures being sighted throughout this region, and it was believed to be that of a Native American lore. Now, the thing with the Lycan loop, and I don't want to kind of sound like I'm off track or distract the listeners and make it sound like, okay, I'm not really making sense with this, because really, I am still learning a little bit more about the Lycan loop as time goes on. That's why I'm doing research in Pennsylvania at the time being. And the most I know with the Lycan loop, besides the whole Native American thing, is that it was of a series of werewolf-like events, and Native American um, mentionings were a part of it. But there's not enough intel to go around to say for sure that it was indeed that of a Native American's involvement, if that makes sense. It's more along the lines of that of a werewolf looking creature roaming the area and like shapeshifting almost in some cases. So that's kind of like the early gist of the Lycan loop. And like I said, I'm still learning about it as we're doing this interview now, so I don't have the full 100% knowledge of it because it's still very new to me. But as of right now, though, that's what I've been told and that's what I've researched. So, in the sense of it being a skinwalker, possibly, but I feel what the Loop Guru is and what we're dealing with is indeed that of a shapeshifting werewolf, not a, and possibly more of them, but and not your typical dogman in a sense.
Yeah, so from what I've been researching is I think definitely some of these dogman sightings are from people using occult methods being able to shapeshift. And then what do you think? We have those going on, and then we have the actual dogman. You know, I'm trying to get at it. It's like to me, without a, I think we were talking about and I always get his name wrong, Schmogelin. He's a very interesting guy that was deep into the occult in like the 60s and 70s and 80s, I believe. And he said that they were, you know, with the use of occult rituals, and I believe there's some sacrifices involved there that people could turn into those things. Um, but it seems like we have, I'd hate to say regular dogmen that are not supernatural in that sense. Do you think we have multiple things going on there?
The thing with me is that when we do dogman research, and from at least when I do it, and when I speak to people of the team, I always try to tell them that, and I we all agree to it, even if I don't say it or they specify themselves, that I feel dogmen and werewolves are two different creatures. I feel dogmen are these like Sasquatch, not aggressive but can be aggressive, but are very usual canines that have abilities that resemble or your werewolf from Hollywood movies, but are a cryptid of its own, but not really a werewolf. Whereas when I look at a werewolf, you hear reports of aggression, telepathic communication, and supernatural abilities, and things that just don't add up, such as chasing a car or chasing someone out of the woods, or aggressively the eye shine doesn't seem right. There have been reports of eye shine that's been red and it doesn't illuminate, it's glowing. So then you know there's a big difference between illumination and of course glowing of eye shine. So you see it as is, and there are reports of also just how a lot of livestock are brutally killed, because there's reports, and it's interesting because I'm doing the next episode of my Dogman States is in Kentucky, and I'm reading a report of all these animal mutilations, these livestocks just brutally torn apart, and it doesn't sound to me like a dogman, and even a Sasquatch. A Sasquatch will snap a neck of a creature if it chose to, and a dogman, I'm sure, will kill a creature brutally, but not in the sense of ripping the jaws out of goats' mouths or ripping the intestines out of a horse. I'm not trying to get into too many specifics, but a lot of these cases I'm reading in Kentucky, I don't believe are dogmen. I believe that these are werewolves or skinwalkers or something that is far more aggressive, that is committing these acts, because you're dealing with something here that just strongly, I feel if it was a dogman, it wouldn't be as aggressive as what I'm getting at. Whereas a werewolf, I feel, and plus with supernatural connections such as telepathic discussion and the glowing eye shine being two examples, I feel are more related to werewolf like phenomenon. So to tell the difference between the two, I think it just depends on the behavior and the attitude. And plus, I feel if it was a werewolf, you wouldn't be able to really like kill it, so to speak, or shoot at it and it would bleed. I feel that a lot of cases where the dogmen are shot at and they bleed are flesh and blood animals, not just for the sense of them bleeding, but for the sense of it being that they are creatures that could have that ability to bleed but heal, whereas a werewolf or something supernatural would be able to take it as a nothing, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I've heard some encounters where the dog man, not a werewolf, so we can kind of distinguish. They get shot at, and large pieces of flesh can get ripped off, and yet it doesn't seem to bother them. So they must have some regenerative abilities, or something's going on there.
Well, the other thing is too, and that was a word I was looking for prior, was regeneration, or just the simple fact of regenerating oneself. There was an episode of Dogman Encounters, episode 66 to be exact, involving, and it's an infamous one, where this relative of this guy telling the story had killed a dogman. They were in a house. The one guy was out inside the house because there was reports of activity on the property. And long story short, all these guys set up traps and whatnot, and they were shooting at this dogman, and they killed it. There was blood everywhere, and there was just a whole bunch of chaos. These two hunters outside were just shooting at this thing. So I feel that in a sense that if these creatures are flesh and blood animals that you can kill them, it would take a lot of firepower, much like a Sasquatch. And I'm not trying to interstate promotion of killing one of these things, because I'm totally against it unless it was self-defense. But in the sense of what I'm getting at is when you look at a dogman, it's if it's flesh and blood, definitely it can bleed and it can die. Whereas if it wasn't flesh and blood and it was more of a supernatural creature, it would not die, and it would have the ability to run away or to go into a different dimension or a portal, so to speak. There's also been that discussion of that as well.
I'm familiar with the one you're talking about. Is that the one where the family they were on their own property and they dug holes around their house, and I believe what they did was they drove deep stakes in the ground and with a hole, and they had like a big bear trap or something, and they were
Yes,
yeah,
that's the episode.
that is one of the most interesting ones I've ever heard, and that gives you a big clue, because if that story is true, and from listening to that, you know, I believe it.
Oh, I do
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, I have no
I,
reason to. Yeah, but that's one of the most fascinating, and that family was very resourceful.
that's the reason why I believe the story, as well as I also buy the facts of what happened were indeed genuine. Because and this is not to, for me, when it comes to data and when it comes to telling a story, I feel when it comes to resource and when it comes to the events and how things tie in, it's important, especially in a case like this. And it reminds me of when it comes to resource and validation, when people are willing to take lie detector tests and tell and go to public and convince that what they had seen was true, and that no one's afraid of the ridicule, or no one's afraid of saying or feeling as if, they're being told that they're lying, in a sense. If you know what I'm getting at, is I feel that if they did make the story up, that it's a great story. It's a perfect, like, fictionist tale, but I don't think the story is at all cases being fabricated. It's a very resourceful, very truth. There's a lot of truth to it, a lot of evidence to pinpoint it at, and what they had done as methods to make sure that there would be no retaliation with the stakes and whatnot, which was very interesting to me, is the fact that they hid it in such a great sense that it was almost like they did it almost like a gypsy funeral. But
Well, I would hate to go against that family, is all I got to say.
oh, absolutely, I agree
I mean,
100%.
you don't want to mess with those folks. Um, what this is going to be kind of a hard question. It'll almost be like asking you what your favorite song is. Um, what encounter just sticks out in your mind and is the most interesting that you've ever heard? That
Oh man.
that one is one of mine. The one we just talked about is one of mine, and I wish I knew the number on Dogman Encounters, but my favorite one on there is the one where the man, I think it was in upstate New York. I may have it wrong, somewhere in that area, where his cows started bunching up into a corner, and at the end of the story, it looked like some government people came in with some equipment to chase the dogmen out of the area. Do you know, are you familiar with that one?
Is this the one with the Black Ops helicopters and whatnot he had seen prior, and they
Um,
were
I don't think so, and I want to say his name was Michael, but he was on there two or three times. And what he did, he told the local police, and he said it was a small town, so they kind of I think he went to school or something with the policeman that came up, and the policeman evidently had known about this and had called some kind of black ops. I don't really remember any helicopters, but this was the guy where the story started out. The cows, he was gone, and his wife called him and said to come home because there's scratches on the side of his house, and all the cows, all the cattle he had were bunched up into a corner like they're about to break the fence. And him and a friend went on his it wasn't an ATV, but it was like a razor or something, and they were going down this road, and it was dark time, and they thought it was coyotes, so they had weapons with them, and they saw this huge dog man peer out from a tree like they do so many times. And I believe it was his friend. He had a spotlight on it, but his friend shot it and blew off some of his pectoral muscles. You know which one I'm talking about?
the episode. I know which one you're talking about. It's the number that I'm having a tough time
Yeah, I
remembering.
can't. I
It,
can't
it
remember.
sounds like it was recent though, because I remember hearing this story more recently. But at the same time, I could be wrong. But I know exactly which one you're talking about. It's a very interesting encounter, very terrifying one too, nonetheless. Very good episode. Um, but my favorite personally, and it's one of the earlier shows actually, was episode 83. And episode 83 was the one with the girl Danielle and her friend who were in the car, and this creature had the two guys that they were with. They were out and about, and they were waiting in the car, and the creature just approaches the car and tries to get into the car, and it's like putting its paw on the handle of the door from the outside trying to get in, and they lock the doors and everything. It tries to get through the back. The episode actually, I believe, she had gotten upset, and they actually had to cut up the recording at one point because it was so traumatic to remember. But it's one of my favorite episodes because it truly stands out to showcase the intelligence of these creatures, that these things could easily get into anywhere they wish if they really wanted to. Even if it was just to get into a house, all they got to do is just turn the knob a little bit. They're that intelligent enough to open the door. But
They do that. I've heard so many encounters where they try the doorknob. And have you ever heard of a, Sasquatch encounter where they're trying? I know they'll knock, they'll walk. The people will hear the Sasquatch walking around their house, and they'll even knock on things. But I've never heard of a Sasquatch trying to open the door. Have you?
I've never heard of that. I feel they don't do that for a few reasons. One of the reasons being, I feel, is that they don't want to attract attention. I feel that they have a boundary to where they could choose if they really wanted to, they can do that. But then I feel that they also don't want to take the initiative to try and do something that could possibly result in something bad. I feel Sasquatch have more of a tendency to back off on certain things, especially humanity. You mentioned that they can knock. They do that. There have been times where they've kind of ripped at houses that they've banged, and there. There was a few stories. I've actually spoken to people who've told me that they've had Sasquatch bang on their house there and there, and but never have any motive to get into the house itself, which I find to be strange. But like I said, I guess for the less attraction of trying to stir maybe the possibility of this of someone inside, or that these people got guns and they're afraid that they'll get shot at or something, or just the fact being is that they just have no interest in being inside a household, and they just want to just pick the surroundings from the exterior. So
Well, it's like the dogmen do not care. I mean, they
I
don't care if you're there, and if they do care, they'll be chasing you. But they know they are an alpha predator, and they just that's amazing to me. That's a big difference right there between the two cryptids. I was going to ask you if you've seen that video that was either taken in the 60s or 70s. It's black and white and is one of the most fascinating things I've ever seen. It isn't very long, and the guy was in his truck or something. He saw it, and he actually got video of it, and you can see the dog man running towards him. Have you seen that?
Are you referring to the Gable film?
I believe so.
The Gable film, yes. This is interesting.
Yeah,
It's.
give me
I'm
your
glad.
yeah,
I'm
give me
glad
your
you brought that
opinion.
up.
Yeah,
I'm not gonna lie.
I just love that. If I did to me that's not a hoax. I don't know, my gut feeling on it. And one of the creepiest things about Dogman to me is how it can kind of spider crawl.
Mm,
And even
mm.
this one, he wasn't maybe exactly spider crawling, but he was low. And I doubt that's a guy in a Dogman costume.
Well, I will say this because we're talking about the Gable film, and the Gable film to me is one of the best pieces of footage I've ever seen of a Dogman, to be honest with you. Uh, the Gable film was a film that was reportedly sold at an estate sale in the early 2000s, and when the film was reviewed by a local disc jockey named Steve Cook, who came up with the legend song of the Dogman in Michigan in '87 and does the 10-year variation every 10 years. Um, he had originally posted on his website, and it said that this is what could be a Dogman. It was dubbed the Gable film. Now, the Gable film, as you had mentioned, it takes place during, I believe it was the 70s, and it was basically like this 3-minute film of taking place in each 4 seasons, and the one season in the summers when this individual who was in the truck had seen it, and of course you know how it plays out. Um, there, the film has been debatable, and I believe it, and I'm going to say it, and I have no problem saying it, and the ridicule it could give, but I don't believe that film to be a hoax, and I don't believe it to be a hoax for two reasons. First and foremost, you mentioned how you had said that this looks like it has like the spider walk ability, but the way it runs at the charges at the cameraman, first and foremost, what human being has that amount of speed to accelerate at first, like a normal charge on all fours to go after a human being like that? To me, I feel that that's not an actual human being in a costume. That looks like an animal. that has the ability to do that, to able to charge and accelerate at such a very aggressive motion versus charging at someone without any real intention. Like you see it in dogs when a dog starts to come at you when you call it over if it's at a far distance. And this didn't look like a human being running at this cameraman. And then the other thing that really startles me about it is that even though that we don't really get the gist of the creature in size because the video is so wobbly and it moves real quick because of the like 2 second stare down that the human and the creature have. um Not to get too descriptive, but anyways, you have it doesn't look like your typical ghillie suit. Doesn't look like your typical werewolf mask. This thing is huge, and it looks big. In a sense, it looks like it shapeshifts while it's running, but at the same time, I could be very wrong. But unfortunately, according to reports, and I remember I had watched this, and this is what kind of turned down my interest in the research aspect for a while, was Monster Quest was an infamous show from the early 2000s that did documentary type style and research on various cryptids all over the world. You're probably familiar with the show as well.
Yeah.
And their finale episode was the Michigan Dogman. And on that finale episode, they had mentioned the Gable film. Linda Godfrey was on the show as well as Steve Cook. And they apparently revealed that the film was a hoax because the guy that did the film was interviewed, and he described what he had done, from running on all fours, using planks and a ghillie suit, to getting a fake intestinated body that he stuffed wet washcloths in and dyed him with blood to make it look realistic for the second Gable film, which was the follow-up of the first film. And he basically went into
Wait, the second Gable film?
There is a second Gable film, and it's reportedly it's the follow-up of the first film, which is a police investigation. And I don't know, I could send you the link to that, but it's an interesting piece because there are two films. And the first film is the one we just talked about, and this is the second film, in which it's a police follow-up of the guy, the cameraman, and that his body was torn in half. But it looks very realistic to the point where it's like, okay, that looks very spooky and strange. But the thing about the film, though, is that compared to the first film, this one looks very more modernized, but at the same time, it's because versus the original 7mm you see in the first one. And that's why I think a lot of people who have seen the film itself and have heard the testimony of Monster Quest believe it to be a hoax. But personally, there's something about the actual film itself that I don't believe to be a hoax, and I think it has a lot to do with this creature's movement.
I'm going to have to look into that more because I didn't know there was a second Gable film. And, it sounds possible that the second one was a hoax.
I believe so. I mean, the thing is that you have a lot of researchers, Linda Godfrey being one. I've spoken to her and she's told me the testimony. She showed me the footage. She showed me a lot of photographs, too, of the behind the scenes thing of this Gable film. But the thing is that it wouldn't surprise me if they can just say it's a hoax just to say for the sake of it, but that there's some truth to this film, that maybe this is indeed a real Dogman on film chasing after a cameraman and slaughtering him. But then again, the thing that really just boggles me is the way this creature moves in the film. It doesn't look like a human.
Did they actually have a police report from that time in the 70s of a guy being mutilated like that?
And that's the other thing I want to present is when you have a case like this that's very public and there's footage of it, there's reported to be no testimony, no police report of a Gable individual. It's dubbed the Gable film because it was found at the estate sale with the strip being called Gable, but there's no reports on who the individual was, if this guy, family wise and everything. And that's why I think when it comes down to people saying it's a hoax is because of the very little credentials and resource that it provides. But at the same time, when you look at a lot of Dogman cases like LBL, or if you look at cases in Texas, for example, there's some cover cases there, or even in upstate New York, there's not a lot of intel on some reports because it's very confidential. Could this be the case in Michigan? Most likely. But it's a very tough thing to really adjourn to without the amount of evidence provided on the table.
Do you know about what year the Gable film was purchased at a estate sale? Even around about, is
Um,
this the 80s or what?
I believe it was taken and purchased because I'm following what the original story of it, how it was discovered. If there's another story out there of it being discovered differently, I mean, if someone who happens to listen to the episode and knows, please feel free to share for Abnormal or myself. But um, it was reportedly found at an estate sale in the early 2000s. So I'm going to have to say between 2005 or mid 2000s, most likely at this point, but either between either 2004 to 2006,
See,
because
the
when Steve Cook,
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, oh
Well,
no, I was
the relevance of that and the reason why I asked that is because if it was found in the 2000s, then I might can see somebody. It's not CGI, right? I mean, you can definitely tell that is not CGI.
no.
But if it was found in the 80s, it's the earlier that it is, the harder it is to fake with certain things, even the materials they had to build stuff. So I'm going to look into that some more because I've only seen the first Gable film, but I just have a hard time seeing that that was a hoax. And in the first one, you never do really see what happens to the guy, right? It's not like there at the end though. The camera does kind of go wild. Am I remembering that right? Like he got knocked down or something?
Right. Well, let me just throw this out there. A lot of the machinery used in the original Gable film is like from the 60s and the 70s. So these are snowmobiles and trucks that have been manufactured and distributed back in the late 60s and early 70s. So, and the camera itself is from the 70s, 7 millimeter to be exact. So you have a lot of equipment here that was used back in that time period. So to me, and anybody could easily hold on to that equipment and keep it in great condition to use it for the early 2000s because the other verse of this cover up hoax reportedly is that the film itself was made in the early 2000s and that it was, of course, left as a camera reel strip at an estate sale to eventually be picked up and used for what it'd be played for. But going into the whole verse of CGI, I don't see any instance of what I see on film to be CGI. It just doesn't. It doesn't. I would feel to use the CGI in an old camera like that, it would take a lot of hours of framework and a lot of hours of getting to where you want the image and the subject to be that distinctive.
Well, I'd
And
like to say, like you were mentioning, how original equipment was used. That also makes hoaxing more expensive in most cases.
correct.
I don't know if you've ever heard of. This is just an example. The alien autopsy.
Mm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
I don't. I'm not saying that one was real, but I find it fascinating. Even the clock on the wall was from the 50s or whatever. And that adds some credibility when all time error equipment was used. But that's fascinating. I'm glad I brought that up because I'm gonna have to look at the second Gable film. And I don't imagine a whole lot of money was made off the Gable film. Maybe Monster Quest paid somebody, but you know,
Well, I will say this because I don't want to make it sound like I'm fully on the verge of it. I really do think the Gable film is a very historic piece of evidence for people who are intrigued with Dogman, because it is a very mysterious film in its own sense. And surely there, even though that this film has reported to be a hoax for the past decade now, it there's people always going back to it and reopening up the case, saying that, you know what, it doesn't look like a guy in a costume to me. It feels that this is a cover up. I feel that there's more to it. And everyone has that reaction. I've had that reaction, and a few other researchers I speak to on my team have had that same reaction. So I feel that what it is, we may never fully know 100%. People can say it's fake all they wish, but I don't think it is. There's a lot of things besides the movement and between the history of the old machinery used and how it is in such great condition. To me, there's just a lot of things that stand out to me about it being a hoax. But for the second Gable film, you'll notice that it does feel like a more modernized film, which can stand out to it being a bit of a hoax. But could the second one, as mentioned, could be a hoax, and the first one is indeed real? Could the second one be a follow-up of the events that transpired indeed, but really, with all the cover-up sense of a Dogman, why would people want to release footage of an investigation of a mutilated body like that, especially if it was torn in half?
Yeah, see, that doesn't make sense to me. I almost have a gut feeling that the second one was hoax, but I'm gonna have to look more into that. So, um, like I said earlier when I was talking to you, let's talk a little. I wanna hear your thoughts, and you can even say, "Hey, these are just theories." But I guess we talked about it a little bit before. Do you believe these? I know some of them are flesh and blood creatures, but when I'm thinking about Dogman, I'm curious as to what they actually are and what the origins are. There's actually some old historical um, things about dogmen, such as what saint was that? Saint Peter was sometimes drawn as a dogman. There was some long name, and I hope hopefully you know what I'm talking about. Where there was these old stories of actual dogmen that had a civilization and sometimes would trade with humans. I'm interested in trying to figure out the backstory as much as possible, and this is all theoretical, because I don't think right now, we don't know. But after uh, researching this and talking to other researchers and hearing people's encounters, from talking to you earlier, and I'm of the same thought, is that it seems like we may be dealing with a couple of different things here, although they can look similar. What do you think these things really are? And do you believe some of them are supernatural? Or do you think both of them, it's the possibility of both of them being a reality?
Well, I will say this, and for everybody out there who also listens, I mean, what I'm going to say is of my opinion and from what I've collected, and very much so every other researcher who has said this could also state it as a theory as well. But I personally feel that we don't have the definitive amount of information that's beneficial for the field to where we can say it is 100% fact. Because because a dogman is still relatively a new creature in the cryptid world. It's only 30 something years old in relevance of encounters and backstory. And it's still a brand new fleshed out creature. So to go into the theory, because much like you, I want to know the same things as well, because I had the same theory thought set too. I ask myself constantly there and there, what are these things? Like what they really are. Are these things a flesh and blood animal that was conceived just as is as a hybrid of a mixture of a wolf and possible other DNA? That other DNA I don't know, but or is this thing a werewolf, not from the Hollywood lore of man on full moon transforms into a werewolf, but that of a creature with supernatural abilities? It works both ways. But personally, when we look at the Native American folklore, We think of fallen angels. We mentioned fallen angels earlier as well. Uh, that these creatures could be fallen angels, descendants, uh, and these things have these supernatural abilities to coincide, which would make them werewolves, such as telepathic connection, glow and eye shine, um, chasing human beings, trying to attack human beings. There have been reports of where these creatures have chased after cars and have slightly damaged them. There have been cases where they've kept up on cars for nearly half a mile for some unknown purpose. The car could be going 55 per hour on the highway, and this creature will be keeping right up next to it as if it was just jogging in place properly. And then there's also the theory of them being the cousins of the Anubis in ancient Egypt, in which you hear the cases all the time. Uh, then you also have the infamous theory of them being. Now, I want to just touch base real quick. I'm just talking on what could be the origins on what that could be as a theory. I'm not saying this as 100% being fact.
Well, yeah.
Be-
Well, at this point, I think that's all we can really do right now. And
Correct.
when
Yes.
I'm looking, I'm kind of a generalist. I look at everything I can that's supernatural, paranormal, abnormal, whatever. And I think in most cases, you can really kind of uh, consolidate it all down to three or four different probable possibilities. And that's important to do because that's kind of all we can do at this point right now.
Right, and that's another thing too, because you have, in my opinion, personally, the way I have looked at it, I feel that these are descendants of our Native American folklore, possibly being the chain and warriors, the dog soldiers, the real dog soldiers, and possibly being fallen angels in the supernatural sense of them being werewolves. But I will say this though. I do believe that a dogman is a typical flesh and blood creature, much like a Sasquatch roams the forest, curious of human civilization. There have been cases where they've been in people's garbage cans and they just look at you and they'll just walk away. Whereas in the more aggressive cases where they'll try to get into cars or chase after cars, or more importantly, things with humans that are very life threatening in a sense. I feel those are more of a supernatural creature, more werewolf like, more skinwalker like, possible Wendigo or something that of a Wendigo. Now, I know that sounds kind of like I'm putting two and two into two different mixes, but I feel that a typical flesh and blood animal, much like a bear or a lion, would a dogman is it would have enough sense to back away. If a Sasquatch can do it, I'm sure a dogman can do it. But then again, too, a dogman could also have those same aggressions that I described of what could be a werewolf, because necessarily too with a werewolf has supernatural abilities. I know for some people who have told stories of them shooting at one of these things and it feels like it doesn't pierce them. It feels like they're still immune to it and they regenerate. I feel that's a supernatural creature because like we both mentioned, I mean, if there's an episode of Dogman Encounters where this guy's on the property killed this thing, then if you hear cases of them not being killed, that makes me wonder,
Well,
well,
that would definitely. I really think there's two or three different origins here of them,
mm,
and you're right. It's not a fallen angel if they can be killed. That's for certain. But I have to say that I look at things through a biblical lens, and I don't mention that often. But the angels could come down and basically shapeshift into anything they want, but they can also appear as humans. And I have to put this point out there. They can appear as humans and you wouldn't know it. The Bible also says you may be entertaining an angel and not even know it. And just think if you were a fallen angel, what better suit, what better shape to be in than a dog man. I mean, it can kill anything if it wanted to. It's fast, it can jump, you know what I mean? It's the ultimate predator. And I want to mention another factor of a supernatural dogman would be just the fear and the telepathy that in some encounters it has. That is not going to be a normal flesh and blood creature. I just have to say one more thing. I believe in the Bible it says that the fallen angels came down and mated with the human women. And you have to look into it, but there's also seems to be like and especially if you read it in the book of Enoch, they they mess with, they did genetic manipulation on over 200 something creatures, it says. And then in Egypt, you have, Anubis and all these different pictures of like, what do you call those? Anthropomorphs or something, where they're half human, half animal. So I just have to say that I think there's some clear distinctions there, and if you can kill it, it is not going to be a fallen angel. But if they were manipulated, if the fallen angels or manipulated the bodies of them, that could be a carryover. So they're almost like a demigod in that way. They were not they weren't a straight up fallen angel, but they were the offspring or the manipulation of them. Anyway, so I definitely think we've got a couple of different types of dogmen there, and I find it fascinating that because to me the skinwalker, the Native American Indian origins of it, I believe they had to kill the story is that they had to kill a close relative to shapeshift. That is an occultic practice when they have to have a ritual and do a sacrifice. And Bill Schnoglin said that they basically the same thing. Satanists were doing that. And then you add in that a lot of dogman sightings are reported around Native American burial sites, right? So I think there's an
Hmm.
occult demonic fallen angel aspect to the supernatural ones for sure.
I agree with that. I know I wasn't specific when it came to that aspect of it too, because, like we can all say too. I mean, I personally believe that there's at least three or four of them tops in the world as difference, and because the dogman term is so well coined, it's just hard to really identify what's what. But I do believe in that theory as well because when you look at Native American burial grounds, like not to switch the gears, but to, for example, LBL, when you look at a place like Land Between the Lakes, a very well known place filled with a lot of activity, you have so much going on, but there's also so many Native American burial grounds. Then you have places, there's a few reports I've picked up recently. Some were seen at cemeteries. Some were seen running at a cemetery. Some were seen right around an initial part of the cemetery, almost like it was guarding a specific tombstone. And to me, that makes me wonder that there is a Native American connection to these things. There is something more to it. What it is, I don't know, because really I would feel the only way I would really know as if I was to sit down with one, not to sound in a sense of negatives or sarcasm, but I would feel the only real way I would get an understanding out of it is if there was one to explain to me why they do that or why there's a sense of it there, whether it's because there's fascination with this specific part of it or it's one of their purposes, almost like, yeah, they're summoned, and it's like they're like the spirits are like, look, we need you here. This is your area. I don't want to sound too odd out of shape with it or sound like I'm giving it a reason, but it does astonish me why they are in locations like that without having the right answers, unfortunately.
Well, you're right. But it's not just Native American uh, burial sites. It's also cemeteries, right?
Correct. There was a report of I was actually in Kentucky, actually, of an individual back in the 70s who had seen one of these things right around one of the cemeteries up in the northern part of Kentucky. And this thing just was in the cemetery, didn't budge, didn't do anything. And then it let out a very ruthless snarl and just ran away. And I'm actually going to be mentioning that on my new episode coming out soon. But I bring it up because, the discussion of it, but also because some people believe that there's something about cemeteries in them that, or there's a connection, whether it's because of the kinetic energy that is profound through the grounds of that specific area of the dead and this creature, or there is something in this area that's sacred to them or something like that. I could be wrong, but it just astonishes me that they're seen even in cemeteries, and you don't hear this from Sasquatch at all. You never
Well,
do.
this makes me wonder if there are more supernatural dogmen seen around cemeteries, or if it would seem like there was your normal flesh and blood dogman seen in cemeteries. Because I'd want to say I would bet on supernatural ones being hanging around the burial sites, but that might be something interesting I could look into later.
I feel that if they're in cemeteries and Native American burial grounds, I feel that there is a connection with it being a supernatural creature, and much like the same reasons we talked about earlier with Native American lore and whatnot. So yeah, I'd have to second that too. I feel the ones that are not seen in environments like that, though, are your typical flesh and blood, or they just don't prefer. You know what I mean?
Right, right. Well, I guess since we're over an hour here, I could talk to you all day long, and this has been a lot of fun. Do you have a website or anything you want to let everybody know what you got going on? Anything like that? I just wanted to give you a chance to, um, plug anything you got going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I have another. My YouTube is the Venomous Fringe, and I can always send out links to wherever you can reach me at. That's the YouTube. We currently just did an episode with Josh Turner. For everybody out there who are Dogman listeners, you know of Josh Turner on Dogman Encounters Radio and whatnot. We are currently doing our Dogman State episodes, which are basically we are retrieving data. We're discussing data, but we're also retrieving data at the same time. And how we do that is we are going to showcase a map full of encounters in each state, and we're going to talk about that state. We're going to talk about where they're seen, where they're not seen, and people who are from that state or know if anybody from that area or have had an encounter themselves contact us, and we put more data out there. And the only way you can really pull that out there is if you guys wish, if you watch one of the episodes, like for example, in the state of Ohio, you have an Ohio story or know someone who has an Ohio story, just reach us at an email. And that email is the venomousfringe@gmail.com. I will actually type it out for abnormal, so we're going to get to all the links and stuff because there have been
Yeah.
times where people have gotten confused with it. So
Well, no,
but that's basically
I will,
information wise.
right, I will definitely put all that information in the description of this video. And you guys like and subscribe to the Venomous Fringe. And I guess I guess you're going to interview me, so I'll actually be on your channel also. So that's pretty cool. I don't think I've ever been interviewed before. So you
In
guys,
fact,
yeah, you guys check that out on his channel. And I really appreciate you giving me the chance to ask you all these questions, Chris. And yeah, I'm definitely a subscriber. I'm pretty much still looking into all your videos. I listened to a bunch of them last night, and you do really have a great channel. So I think everybody should definitely check it out.
absolutely. Thank you for the kind words. Seriously, and you as well. You have a very fantastic channel. I really like your videos as well.
Yeah, I think if you look at my channel, it's mostly Mandela effect videos. I think I'm gonna start just interviewing people every once in a while. I think that are interesting, and I think that's where I'm kind of going with my channel. So Everybody should look for that. And anyway, guys, I guess we're going to wrap this up. And I appreciate you coming on, Chris.
Thank you again, Abnormal, as well as to your audience. Thank you for listening. And as always, thank you. Really glad I was honored. Really glad to be here tonight.
All right, guys. Until next time, we're going to sign off. See you guys later.